Pretty much anybody can make cheese today if they want to. Of course, not everyone wants to, and while I think that's a bit strange, it is totally fine. However, for hundreds of years in many parts of Europe, cheese making was largely the task of women, and only rarely one done by men. Hey there cheese historians, I'm Julia and welcome to Cheese History, a channel all about the origins, history and impact of cheese. Today we're going to take a quick look at the role of dairywomen in cheese making throughout much of Europe's history, particularly since the Middle Ages. I'm going to address two aspects of the history of dairywomen: what their role was and how it changed over time, and why dairywomen eventually went into decline. Typically on a farm in the Middle Ages, the men would handle the work of the farm, such as tending the livestock and growing the crops that would provide the income for the household. Cheese making was one of the many tasks undertaken by women to keep their households running smoothly. If a family had a cow, goat or sheep kept for milk, then most, if not all of that milk could be preserved by being made into cheese. The duties of milking the cows and making the cheese fell to the women of the households, who were also responsible for raising the chickens and swine, collecting the eggs, bringing the grain to the miller and returning with flour, baking the bread, brewing the beer, keeping the herb garden, feeding, clothing and caring for the children, preparing the food and cooking the meals, carding, spinning and weaving the wool and flax to produce clothing, blankets and more, making a range of household necessities, and so on. A very demanding portfolio of duties. Whew. Makes me tired just reading about it. The cheeses made by these exceptionally busy women were likely pretty simple, making quite small cheeses depending on the amount of milk their animals produced. They didn't need to be complicated though, as their main purpose was to preserve milk for a few weeks or maybe months and turn it into something that could be easily eaten rather than drunk. Later in the Middle Ages, the role of women in cheesemaking moved from a role as part of a woman's household responsibilities to an important role in the production of cheese. The history of the term dairymaid captures this shift. The word dairymaid came from the Old English word dai, which originally meant a female dough kneader, a bread maker and head of household. After the Norman conquest, when cheesemaking moved out of the house and into a special room, that room was called a dai and then a day house. By the 12th century, cheesemakers in Wiltshire were called dairymaids. Women worked as dairywomen for both manors and monasteries throughout Europe. As cheesemaking was hard work, it could not be done by a single woman or by herself. So teams of dairywomen overseen by a head dairywoman would work in the dairies, milking the animals and making the cheese. The head dairywomen passed their knowledge on to their subordinates over many centuries. The dairy was very much the sphere of women, and men were often not permitted to enter into the cheesemaking rooms. Hygiene is very important in cheesemaking. Dairywomen were known for being clean and tidy, both personally and in keeping their dairies clean throughout the daily cheesemaking process. They also had to be strong, because cheesemaking is hard labour, with lots of animals to be milked first thing in the morning, lifting buckets of milk, stirring great big vats of milk or curds, transferring curds into cheese presses and adding weights to the presses to press the cheese. Then there is moving the finished cheeses into the aging cave or cellar and regularly turning them to make sure they age properly. You needed to be tough and hard-working to work as a dairywoman, which is why some of the reasons for their decline and replacement by men are so surprising. It was science and technology that led to the eventual decline of the role of women as the primary makers of cheese in much of Europe. Englishman William Marshall began to study the practices of cheese making in the late 18th century, publishing what he discovered so others could learn the secrets of cheese making. Others also began writing about cheese making at this time. These publications portrayed dairywomen as stuck in the past and unwilling to take on board the suggestions of these learned gentlemen. Around the same time, there was increasing pressure for consistency in the cheese produced, so cheese factors, the middlemen who bought the cheese from rural farms to sell in the cities, began discovering and promoting what they considered to be best practices for cheesemaking. For the dairywomen, this must have been a really trying time, with all these people who have little or no experience making cheese telling you how best to do the job that you had spent years mastering. It's worth remembering that these women were making cheese without the aid of thermometers, pH meters, or standardized milk, meaning they had to be able to make changes depending on how the milk on a particular day was behaving during cheese making, without any real scientific understanding of what was happening at the microscopic level. While all this was going on, cheesemaking was also becoming a more profitable enterprise. In Normandy in the 19th century, dairy farming began to push meat farming out as the main way of making a living through cattle. With the expansion of railways, cheese and butter were becoming more profitable than beef farming, and many Norman farmers made the switch. However, this led to domestic problems. Husband-wife relations on Orge farms were typified not by the husband's absolute authority, but an accepted complementarity between the two. Domestic tasks, house, stable, dairy, were the province of the wife. Outdoor labour, especially anything dealing with the cattle that were the principal source of income, fell to the husband. The switch to cheese production as the household's principal economic activity altered this balance by making the wife's role preeminent. If men were to consent to forego cattle raising and turn exclusively to cheese manufacturing, they would have to become masters in this new enterprise traditionally reserved for women. It took several decades for the Normans to work out a satisfying response to this question. Even those farms that turned to cheese production on a large scale continued to engage in cattle raising, thus assuring the male a noble activity in herd management and trading. This was to be the case until the male created a front-rank position for himself where cheesemaking was concerned, namely the role of senior manager, which dispensed him from the dairy activities that were still carried out by women and under female supervision, while affording him a new management function and a commercial role. Even though in some places men only took on supervisory roles, slowly but surely women's hold on the secrets of cheesemaking began to erode away. While it was science that began to invade the dairy, it was technology, particularly industrialization, that instigated the full takeover. But with industrialization, women were gradually pushed out of dairies, except on small family farms. Cheddar was a forerunner of industrial cheese because of an early 19th century cheddar maker, Joseph Harding, who wanted to produce as much cheese as possible, as efficiently as possible. Many of his ideas led to the cheese factory, and he was one of the first to employ male cheesemakers. Part of their large-scale production was to make huge individual cheeses that were thought to be too big and heavy for women to handle. Clearly, the people who thought this weren't thinking about the milkmaids who used to carry 70-pound or 30-kilo buckets of milk through the streets of cities like London selling milk, and the dairy maids who in 1880s England were making cheeses like cheddar that could weigh around 45 kilos. It was then, too, that some dairies began switching to male managers, something new at the time. Women could do farm work, but industry was for men. There was a widely held prejudice against women in factories. In some countries, there were laws against women working in factories at all, or working on Sundays, or working night shifts. Initially, many cheese factory owners objected to these new laws. In Holland, cheesemakers said that cheese could not be made without the expertise of women. Gradually, though, they learned that cheese could be made effectively with an all-male staff. Of course, women were not completely removed from cheesemaking. They remained working mainly in small farmhouse dairies. During the First World War, women were needed to fill the roles of men who had been sent to the various fronts of the war to fight, and this included working on farms and in cheesemaking factories. Although the shift to industrialization and factory production of cheese meant that women lost their place as the primary cheesemakers, perhaps this was not necessarily a bad thing in the long run. Today, cheese all over the world is made by both men and women, both by home cheesemakers, small artisanal cheesemakers, as well as in large industrialized factories. Cheesemaking is no longer something that has to be done by a certain type of person, but can be done by anyone who wants to give it a go and can put in the time and effort to improving their skills and understanding of what is happening in the cheesemaking process. Thanks for watching this quick video on the role of dairywomen in the cheese history of Europe. If you'd like to know more about the history of cheese, you should check out this video on the role of medieval manors and monasteries in shaping the cheeses of Europe. A special thank you goes to all my patrons over on Patreon for all your support and for everyone who leaves a comment on each of my videos. I really enjoy reading your thoughts and suggestions. And I'll see you around, Cheese Storians!